Sales process build is not what I would call the hardest thing. I think the challenge for B2B owners is, they come into businesses and they're successful at selling their products or services because they have so much emotion behind it. It's their heart and soul. So they're always their best salesperson in their company's history, almost always anyway, right? Very rarely, I hear owners all of the time tell me that they're not good salespeople. And I'm like, well, then you don't understand what sales is, because you're great at what you do, because you genuinely find out if people have the right pain point that you can solve, right? Because owners don't want to sit there and try to solve a pain point for somebody they can't solve the pain point for, right? They're not in the business of collecting money just to collect money, generally speaking. So they genuinely are trying to help people, and they want to find the right customer. So if they can solve the problem, so they ask the right questions, right? Which is at the core of sales. They're asking the right questions. They can solve the problem, and then they present their offering very, very well because they built it. So when I hear them say that they aren't good salespeople, I always kind of chuckle, because I'm like, well, you're the best salesperson you're going to have in your history, right? But where they're weak and where they need help is there's a big difference between sales and marketing, right? Marketing being lead generation for B2B, right? Driving inbound leads. That's something that owners don't do well, right? They don't understand very well. Even marketing agencies are particularly good at it. It's building a process for companies starts with looking at, how, first of all, can you scale what you offer, right? So that's got to be at the core of the big picture plan. Can you scale, right? Then we have to look at, who's selling for you now? Where are you trying to go? So now we get the end game in mind first, and then we work our way backwards. So now I want to look hard at sales process. Is there a BDR, SDR layer in there between lead gen and sales? And it depends on the sales structure, right? If it's account execs, account managers who are going to be working with the customer permanently, then I don't want an SDR, BDR layer in there. I want them, the reps, dealing with the inbound leads directly. I mean, the salespeople, right? If we're talking about hunter salespeople, right? What we call hunter salespeople in my agency, meaning, they're present, they close, and then they hand off that business or that customer to somebody in fulfillment, and they never deal with the customer in the big picture, right, in the long run. Then I want them on sales calls all day long, ideally. And I certainly don't want them cold calling, especially if they're in the United States with base salaries that are significant. I want them scheduled all day long with appointments, and I want, and then I want a BDR, SDR layer of some kind, SDR, let's call it, to deal with the inbound leads, get information out, drive them to schedule with sales. And then, of course, they can do, follow-up and outreach and all kinds of stuff to those leads and keep moving those people to schedule with the salesperson. Then you don't add any salespeople until that salesperson's schedule is full, right? That's a pretty basic model that I would look at for somebody. So anyway, I start at the end first and look at, where are you trying to go? Can you scale what you do? Who's going to sell for you? Right? That kind of stuff first. If it's something that's not very scalable, then one of the principals can do the sales, or they hire one salesperson, and that's probably sufficient forever. Right? It all depends on scalability and other things, but we go to the end game first. We work our way backwards. We look at process. We look at sales team structure. We look at layers of people in there. We want to try to minimize the number of layers, but also we have to be efficient. And then the biggest challenge, going back to my kind of where I started, the biggest challenge for owners is not sales. So when I talk to owners, it's not, again, they know how to sell their product. They don't even know how well they know how to sell their products and services, but they're exceptional at it. They just don't know how to build a lead generation system. They're not marketers. It's why they end up hiring marketing generalists a lot of times. When they get stuck and they don't know what else to do, they go hire a marketing generalist that has some feel for marketing and can do social media posts for them. It's not going to drive any business, but that's their first reaction, because they've been burned by lead gen firms so many times. They've been burned by lead gen firms. They've been burned by SEO firms and digital agencies that, claim to do SEO. And SEO is a complex thing and involves a lot of moving parts. It's in a long-term process. That's a different conversation for a different day. but they've been jaded by the agencies and the firms that are supposed to help them. So now they're frustrated. So now they want to bring somebody in-house because that's where they found success historically as a business owner, is that they have their own people, their own team, which normally I love, except for on the marketing part, because you've got to find someone that understands how to drive inbound leads for your business. And in business to business, that's going to mean email first if you're nationwide. Maybe if you're local or regional, it can still work if there's enough prospects out there. But what I specialize in, one-to-one text-based email marketing and high volume from a person to a person. Asking them a question. Do you have this pain point? If you do, I can help you solve it. Here's what I want you to do next. Elicit a reply. Right? That's how you generate leads with email. I want to do email first. It's always my first choice. If the list is too narrow, then I want to veer in the direction of a BDR, doing cold outreach to a narrow list, and combine that with low-level automated email and LinkedIn. It's a more complex process that way when your niche is small. It's a little more complex because you have more difficult moving parts, and you got to rely upon a person. On the cold outreach side, but at the end of the day, that's really the only way to do it, because if you don't, the way I build systems for email, if you don't have tens of thousands to go after, or prospects, meaning people, it doesn't mean companies necessarily, but you got to have at least tens of thousands to justify building an email marketing system that's going to run 6,000 a day from a box, right? Which is how I build it. Typically my clients would have 100,000 plus prospects that we would load into a campaign. I build a list and everything too, but I mean, we got to have 100,000 plus prospects. And I have clients who have, over approaching 1 million, and some that have, if they're very, very general, what they do for companies and for owners, it could be 2 million, right? There's 50 million in the system I put clients on in the United States. So there's a lot of business contacts out there, but at the end of the day, like, again, you work from the back end and where you're trying to go, and you plan it, and then you work your way to the beginning. And the beginning is, how do we generate inbound leads? And that's the biggest challenge for most owners. And so when you talk to them, they a lot of times they think, well, I just need to hire a salesperson, right? Because they think salesperson, they think cold outreach and sell, which makes no sense. First of all, we don't want to be doing cold calling if we don't have to, number one. Number two, you certainly don't want a salesperson in the United States that's making 50, 75, 100,000 plus doing cold calling. That's absolutely, ROI is never going to pan out. It's not going to work. Again, very niche, narrow audience, and territorial sales reps who have a very, very narrow audience. That's a different conversation, right? We'll talk about that later. But generally speaking, what I deal with is B2B companies that are, targeting nationwide, whatever they do, products, services, software, whatever it is, coaching, consulting, that you have to find a way to generate inbound leads, and email is going to be the most effective way to do that when it's done properly. Hands down, there's nothing that touches it. But that's the challenge and the problem for most business owners, going back to kind of the beginning, is how they're wanting to build what they have. They want to build their company, and how do they do that, right? What's the process to do that? What do they have to think about? What's the right way to go about planning that? And again, it starts at the end, and then you work your way back to the beginning. And the hardest part for most of them is going to be the two things. Driving inbound leads is hard for them on their own, and then replicating them as a salesperson, finding the right person that can come into their company and be them, right? Maybe there's multiple reps, obviously, in a lot of companies and huge sales teams, but replicating them as best as possible from a sales standpoint, for sure. Like, that's the second hardest thing probably in most firms.